Tonight we're in Brecon. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Theresa Villiers, the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, a Tory backbencher who backs Boris Johnson in the current leadership contest. Elected as a Labour MP in 2015, he previously worked for the British Council in Russia, Sierra Leone and Brussels. Stephen Kinnock. Adam Price, leader of Plaid Cymru since last September and a former MP who was elected to the Welsh Assembly in 2016. Mark Reckless, formerly a Conservative MP who left the party to join UKIP and is now leader of the Brexit Party in the Welsh Assembly. And award-winning international comedian, author and political campaigner, Francesca Martinez. To our panel, to our audience here, and of course to you at home. You can argue along in the usual way using hashtag BBCQT on Facebook, on Twitter and on Instagram. Join in the conversation. Let's kick off with our first question, which tonight is from Stephen Thomas.
Thank you. Are broken promises, gaffes and hanging from a zip wire the criteria for becoming the next Prime Minister?
I can't think who you mean, Stephen. I think we might be talking about Boris Johnson here. Stephen, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I think we are in an extraordinary situation and, you know, I disagree with just about everything the Conservative Party has ever stood for, but they are one of the oldest political parties in the world and one of the most important, whether we like it or not. And I think it is deeply disturbing now that they are on the point of electing a right-wing populist as their leader. They are on the point of electing someone who claims that he's going to be a unity figure, but has referred to Muslim women as letterboxes. A man who has talked about black people having lower IQs than the rest of us. A man who has also claimed that he should be elected on the basis of his competence. And yet he is the person that spent £43 million on a vanity project for a bridge where not a single brick was laid. He commissioned some buses where the back door didn't work properly, and that had to get scrapped. He commissioned a water cannon where it's illegal to actually use them, and he claims that he has the competence. And worse than all, of course, when he was Foreign Secretary, his careless words, the man who was supposed to be the head of Britain's diplomatic service, his careless words ended up with a woman, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, being locked up in Iran for far longer than usual. He is absolutely not fit to be the Prime Minister of this country, and the fact that he's going to be elected by 120,000 members of the Conservative Party, let's face it, not exactly a representative sample of the population of the United Kingdom, is a democratic and a constitutional and a national political outrage.
I think it's actually about 160,000, but we hear you.
Give or take.
Theresa Villiers, you're backing Boris Johnson.
Yes.
Did he really say that black people have a lower IQ?
No, there was a reference to that in an article that was published in The Spectator. It was not written by Boris, so I want to correct that. The reason why I'm supporting Boris to be the next Prime Minister of this country is because he will lead from the centre ground, and his record as Mayor of London demonstrates that.
Actually, can we just talk about that for a minute? Because he talked in his campaign launch yesterday about how he was a man who kept his promises, and he cited his record as Mayor of London. I was just looking at some things. You mentioned some of them, Stephen. He pledged to end rough sleeping in the capital by 2012. This was in 2009. In fact, the number of rough sleepers doubled by 2015. He campaigned against Ken Livingstone's plans to close London Underground ticket offices, signing a pledge to keep them open, and then just 4 years later he announced he was closing them all. That's not keeping his promises, is it?
But the reality is that he, on those issues, on ticket offices, they took a difficult decision, but I think that reflected the huge advance in technology that came with the Oyster system. It meant that ticket offices were not needed in the way that they had previously. But his record is very clear. He saw the murder rate fall by 50%, crime overall fell by 20%, knife crime came down by 17%, and he managed to cut taxes by 20% as well. This is a significant record of delivery. We need someone as Prime Minister who will get a grip on crime, as he managed to do when he was Mayor of London. That's one of the many reasons why I think he is capable of being the right leader for this country.
And can I just ask you, because there's been a little bit of confusion about exactly where he stands on suspending Parliament if he can't get a Brexit deal through. What has he said to you? Has he ruled out proroguing or suspending Parliament
well,
if he can't get the deal through?
That's absolutely not the plan that he's putting forward.
No, but has he ruled it out, or is it still on the table?
I'm not aware that he's completely ruled it out, but
so it's possible.
His goal is to get better terms from the European Union and present that agreement to Parliament. If the European Union are not prepared to offer better terms, then we are still living on the 31st of October, deal or no deal.
Even if he has to suspend Parliament to do so?
Well, I believe that I think a determined Prime Minister can take us out on the 31st of October. I'm not convinced that Parliament would be able to frustrate that, regardless of the issue of prorogation.
Adam Price.
Well, you know, I think Rory Stewart summed it up today, didn't he? Say you wouldn't want to have him anywhere near the nuclear button, would you? I mean, it seems his handlers don't even want him anywhere near a TV studio. I mean, they don't have any confidence in him. He's created over the years, hasn't he, this sort of Boris brand of being, a bit of a hapless maverick. But, don't believe it. I mean, he's far cleverer than that. I mean, he's a modern Machiavelli in a clown costume. I mean, remember that the article that he wrote, one for leave, one for remain, and he decided at the last minute which was most politically expedient for him. I mean, this is a man that sees politics as a kind of extension of an Oxford Union debate. It doesn't really matter what side you're on. The only thing that matters is that you win. I mean, it's a disaster that's about to befall us, He'll almost certainly be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, but he'll probably be the last, because I don't see the Scottish sticking around for this. Probably the Northern Irish will leave as well, and if we Welsh had any sense, we'll declare ourselves an independent country because the alternative of the United Kingdom under Boris Johnson, of all people, I think is too horrible for us to imagine.
Let's hear from the audience. The man there in the glasses.
Boris Johnson, right, could zip wire into Brussels and like a wrecking ball and make no difference at all. Our Parliament is gridlocked and stuck. So whoever the few of the Tories elect as a leader, the first thing that should be done, I believe, is a general election. To get people in that want to make change. And listen and answer the questions that the people want.
OK. Man there in the glasses.
Yeah, he's also promised 350 million a week to the NHS, but it looks like that's all going to go on tax cuts to the well-off instead.
I'll come back to that. The woman in the front in the glasses, yeah.
It appears that the first thing he wants to do is a tax cut for everybody over 50,000 and leaving everybody else behind. How is that centre ground?
Geez, your mouth's getting a bit of a pasting. Would you like to...
Well, I want to provide some reassurance on the National Health Service. The commitment that the government has made to a £20 billion increase in real-term spending on the NHS in England, with equivalent £1.2 billion for Wales, that delivers over £380 million per week. So that promise is being fulfilled. We fully recognise that we need to fund our NHS generously because we are asking our NHS to do more to care for us as we all get older.
But his tax cut for the rich would actually cut about £450 million from the Welsh budget for all the public services, I mean, where's the justice in that? I mean, he was talking in his launch about actually, creating a more equal Britain, and yet the first policy that he actually pronounces is putting money even further into the deep pockets of the richest people in the United Kingdom. Where's the social justice there?
Look, for many years, more and more people have been brought into the higher rate of tax. I think it's not unreasonable to rebalance that to help people, for example, senior police officers, GPs, senior nurses, I don't think it's so wrong to want people to be able to keep a little bit more of their own money.
If you want to see real economic pain, I'll take you, Theresa, to some of the streets and the villages in Wales. If you want to see real poverty, it's not those higher rate earners that need the handout and the helping hand from government. It's the people that are really suffering. What about the jams that Theresa May was talking about?
Absolutely. Boris's programme will deliver for people at all income levels.
OK.
The Conservatives...
Theresa, that's not the response you wanted, is it? Should we... You're having to take everything here for Boris and answer all of it. Let's just hear from some other people in the panel. Mark?
Well, I think it will depend on whether Boris can deliver Brexit. Now, he talks a good game. He led the Leave campaign and he led it very well. But then he left the field of play. His record as Foreign Secretary wasn't terribly successful. And he is now saying that, deal or no deal, we will leave the European Union by the 31st of October.
And if he does, is there any point in the Brexit Party?
Well, I would like to believe him. It will depend on what he does. He talks a very good game, but will he deliver? We've heard Theresa May say 108 times that we were going to leave the European Union on the 29th of March this year. We did not do so. So I think we need to start counting how often Boris Johnson is saying that he's going to take us out on the 31st of October. Because that's what he needs to say to win the Conservative leadership. But will he actually deliver?
Francesca?
I'm not a massive fan of Boris. I think the fact we call him Boris kind of makes out that he's cuddly and like your mate. But he isn't. This is a really dangerous man. When he was London Mayor, he closed 10 fire stations, and that led to a lot more fire-related deaths. And also, I don't think the NHS is really safe in his hands, because he's been on record saying that people should pay more for NHS services. So I think when we're looking at politicians, we shouldn't listen to what they say. We should look at their voting records and their actions. But I got to say the biggest reason that I'm not a fan of Boris is because he's backed austerity policies again and again. And I don't know if this is widely reported, but austerity has caused the deaths of over 130,000 human beings in Britain. That is absolutely outrageous. That's 130,000 mums, dads, daughters, sons, uncles, aunts who've died because the Tories and the Lib Dems decided to make ordinary people pay for a crash caused by bankers who we bailed out. My final point, as a wobbly woman, I really have to highlight the tens of thousands of disabled people and sick people who have died after being found fit for work. Now, we are one of the richest countries in the world, and this is absolutely outrageous. Even the UN has called Tory welfare reform a violation of disabled people's rights. So I want to remind everyone here that anyone can become disabled or sick at any time. And right now, this government is taking away the safety net that we have fought for collectively over decades to help those in need. And I think whatever your politics, you can agree that punishing disabled people and sick people for falling on hard times is absolutely morally wrong, and they have blood on their hands.
I just want to point out that obviously the only person defending Boris Johnson so far is Theresa, who's been in the hot seat here. He has done extraordinarily well today in the leadership contest, 114 votes. Is there anyone here in the audience who supports Boris Johnson? Yes, the woman there, you stuck your hand up. Yes.
I think you should suspend Parliament. I think that the people of the country want Brexit to go through, and as up until now, nobody is standing up and actually doing what the people want.
And you think he's the man to do it?
Are just sticking their spoke in the wheel all the time.
Anyone else here who supports Boris Johnson? Yes, the man there in the check shirt.
I think at the moment we desperately need anybody who can unite this country. We're in a mess. We've never been in a mess like this probably since the 30s. It's quite desperate. I don't see many people in Parliament at all who can do this. And even if he unites the country for 6 months to get us through the next 6 months, that's enough for me.
OK, thank you very much. Yes.
I mean, I supported Boris with what he did to lead the Leave campaign. I hope he can unite the country. I just wonder if I can ask Theresa there, who voted 3 times against Theresa May's deal, that Boris Johnson described as vassalage. He said it would be a suicide belt or vest around our country, in a phrase for which he was criticised. But having spoken so strongly against the deal, why did he then vote for it?
I think because he was so keen to see us stick with the exit that had been planned. It was a difficult decision for him. It was a difficult decision for me. I do not believe that the withdrawal agreement genuinely respected the vote to leave, which is why I voted against it, because it would have potentially permanently locked us into obeying the EU's rules and complying with their customs arrangements without actually having a vote on them or any kind of exit door. So I'm sure Boris weighed up pragmatically, the pros and cons of that. But I think what we now need is we just need to get on with it. The country voted to leave, and there is a huge amount of exasperation with this continuing deadlock. We cannot go on like this, and that's why we need a new Prime Minister who's determined to get out on the 31st of October. OK, let's move on. Theresa, thank you.
Before we do, I just want to let you know that Question Time comes from Tottenham in North London next week, and the week after that we will be in Halifax. So call 0330 123 9988. If you'd like to be in the Question Time audience, you can go to the website and you follow the instructions there. Let's take our next question, which is from Robin Evely.
Thank you. When even our lawmakers admit to a drug-taking past, is it time to rethink prohibition?
Yes, there's a lot of it about, isn't there? Various MPs and leadership contenders coming forward and saying they've taken drugs. I wondered if any of you want to come forward right now. Think of this as a confessional. Get it off your chest now. I wasn't necessarily counting you in that, Francesca.
No, I'm happy to start. I've never taken any drugs because I'm wobbly already. It would work. I just want to say, I think it's quite hypocritical of these candidates because many of them have also advocated really harsh drug laws. And I think that's the kind of behaviour that really erodes trust in politicians because it's kind of do as I say, not as I do. And I think we're fed up of that in this country, aren't we? Like the trust level. I've got to say, I am a Jeremy Corbyn supporter. And I think the main reason I am is because I feel that his words are backed up by decades of actions. And I'll just say one quick story. When my disabled friends were holding tiny demos all over to try and cling on to their basic human rights, only 2 MPs turned up again and again. And those 2 people were Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. And I think that shows a real deep commitment to standing up for the rights of people who really need support and help and of campaigning relentlessly in their own spare time for equality, peace and justice. And that's why I believe he's such a rare breed of politician, because his words are backed up by decades of action. And how many times can we say that about an MP?
But Francesca, we're slightly getting off the question, if you don't mind me saying. Is it time to rethink prohibition? That's the question.
I think it's time to rethink hypocritical politician.
OK, we hear you. All right.
Also, I think I'm far more angry about the suffering and misery that they inflict on the British people.
OK. Adam.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. I think the fact that, I mean, I was trying to tot up, but I think the majority of candidates for the leadership of the Conservative Party admitted to taking some form of illegal drug. That's got to be a watershed moment when we realise that, you know, the war on drugs that's been raging for 50 years has failed, right? And if anything good comes out of this Tory leadership campaign, it's that we can have some honesty, not just about individuals and whether they've taken illegal drugs.
Have you taken illegal
honestly,
drugs?
I knew this was going to come up. So I should really have put the call into my mother last night, who was watching. But I'll answer as comprehensively as I can. As a gay man who first went clubbing in the 1990s, it would be a bit of a surprise if I hadn't taken drugs. And look, I'm not saying I'm proud of that, but I'm not going to lie about it either, right? 15 million people in this country have taken illegal drugs of different sorts, right? That's got to be a message to us. The prohibition has failed, and it's failed in the most dismal way possible because it's poisoned people. It leads to adulteration, which has cost thousands of lives. It's put power in the hands of criminal gangs that use violence as their marketing tool, and it's prevented us from having an honest discussion as society as a whole about the dangers of substance abuse, not least, of course, of the most dangerous substance of all, which is the one that we don't prohibit, alcohol.
The woman in the back there.
I work as a professional nurse. I've had to follow a strict code of conduct. If I stood up publicly and said that I had taken Class A drugs, I would not only lose my job, I would be struck off the register.
And do you think the same should happen to MPs, that they should lose their job?
The MPs have a code of conduct, and it's absolutely rubbish compared with the nurses' code of conduct. You know, the nurses' code of conduct covers you in professional and personal life. The MPs' code of conduct only covers them for their professional life.
And that was the hypocrisy here, wasn't it?
Yes, it is.
You was a man that actually supported the most draconian laws, actually sacking teachers as well and other public servants, you know, as Secretary of State, etc. And yet, you know, he himself was guilty of the same thing.
So obviously you're talking about Michael Gove
there can be no forgiveness for hypocrisy in politics.
The man in glasses there.
Should law breakers be lawmakers?
All right. Well, listen, we're going to go round the panel on this. The man there in the pink shirt. Adam, just wait a minute, because we've heard...
Is the law wrong? Is the law wrong?
OK,
that's the real question we should ask
Let's hear from the rest of the audience. Yes, the man there.
On the subject of alcohol, which is most important, am I right in saying that maybe even one of the members of the panel missed an important vote in Westminster once because they're under the influence of drink?
Oh, who was that?
Sweet.
Do tell, Mark. Do tell more.
Yes, I think it was. I think it was on raising VAT to 20%, which I did not
Thank you very much.
vote for. And I haven't drunk alcohol for 5 or 6 years. I think alcohol is a very dangerous drug because it is so normalised in society. I think it is very easy for people to get addicted to it. And I think we need to look at alcohol and tobacco in the round, along with drugs which are currently prohibited. And I do believe that we should change our drug laws. I served on the Home Affairs Select Committee for 4.5 years. And I supported the majority in a report when we said it was time to declassify cannabis. Since then, we've seen, I think, 10 American states. We've seen Canada, bulk of Latin America, several countries in Europe have voted to legalise, regulate and tax cannabis. Some of the tax take for that could perhaps pay for some of these tax cuts we're hearing so much about from the Conservative candidates. But what we also said in that Home Affairs report, and we went to Portugal to research it, was we thought where you have highly addictive, dangerous drugs, be it heroin or crack cocaine, if people are addicted to that, if they're ruining people's lives, the best way to try and address it is with a health-led response rather than through the criminal justice system.
OK. Then you agree with that, sir. Stephen.
OK, so I guess first the confession, and then I know you're not going to let me off the hook here without a confession,
I'm
Fiona,
enjoying this
so,
enormously.
You're loving this, aren't you? We should definitely turn the mic on you afterwards, by the way.
No, I get you to answer the question.
Well, I grew up and went to a local comprehensive school in West London, very, very mixed comprehensive school. As far as I could see, about half of the intake in that school was smoking weed, and I was part of that half. And I also was part of the, as Adam referred to, I think some call it the second summer of love in the early 1990s, house music, raves, and I was also a part of that. So that's my confession. I hope you'll be happy with that one, Fiona. On the point, very substantial, important point about are we getting the policy right? I actually agree that the war on drugs is being lost, and it's been lost for a very, very long time. And I think it's causing tremendous disruption in society, heartbreak. Look at the county lines, look at the knife crime epidemic. So much of that relates back to illicit activity around drugs. We've created a black market within which you will get all sorts of gangster and gang-based activity. And I think we've got to actually look very closely at the Portugal example. The way in which Portugal dealt with a huge influx of heroin shortly after they had transitioned from a dictatorship to a democracy. They opened up, and there was a tremendous heroin problem there, and they took a health-based approach rather than a punishment and criminal justice-based approach, a rehabilitation-based approach, where it's about social workers and psychologists and people helping to get addicts off the drugs. And it led to a huge depression in prices in Portugal, which of course takes the gang-based element out of the equation. So I think Einstein said, if you keep on doing the same thing and thinking you're going to get different results, that's the first sign of insanity. We keep trying to do the same thing with drugs and it's not working. I think it's time to innovate, do something different, and help our young people before the gangs and the knife crime gets to them.
Theresa, Boris Johnson was asked about this yesterday, wasn't he? About had he taken cocaine? He didn't quite answer the question. Has he or hasn't he?
Well, I think he just referred back to the statement on, I think, Have I Got News for You, that he was offered it at university.
So, what, he has or he hasn't?
Well, I would just refer back to that statement where he was offered it. It wasn't clear whether, it went up his nose, I believe, is
he didn't inhale.
What he said.
Yes.
But on this whole question, it is... I think these recent revelations do mean that we all need to sort of pause for reflection. My approach has always been on this pragmatic. I've always been open to reform. I've always thought that the science...
Have you taken drugs, really?
Oh, I was hoping I would get away from the confession, but I have had about 3 attempts at cannabis at university. Only the last time I managed to inhale and was promptly sick. So I never touched it again, and I would certainly not recommend it to anyone else. But there is, of course, the debate about legalisation of cannabis, and as I think Mark said, many countries have gone down the road of legalisation, but I've spoken to psychiatrists who day in, day out are treating young people with serious psychosis very often, which is triggered and intensified by cannabis use. So there are very serious health downsides. So that still makes me reluctant to advocate legalisation. I can understand the arguments, and I hear what the audience and the panel say, but it can potentially be a lethal drug for the people who take it, and that's why I'd be reluctant to see it legalised in the way that's been advocated.
Can I just add that I think the wider issue here is that politicians seem to be quite immune from the laws they impose, and I think that is a real problem. And I think, if anything, they should be asked to uphold the law more than anyone else.
Well, I take that point, but on the other hand, let's not forget that we had the case of Fiona Bruce in Peterborough, who was clearly caught speeding, denied it, and Labour campaigned very actively for her to be recalled. That triggered a by-election, and we dealt with the issue, and I think it's absolutely right that when a politician breaks the law in that way, they are held to account as a sitting Member of Parliament. So I take your point, but there is, I think the picture's a bit more nuanced.
Why haven't you done due diligence on her before she was...
OK, let's not go back into that, because the question was actually about drug taking. So let's move on, and I'd like to hear from Janice Lewis.
Shouldn't all over 75s be entitled to a free TV licence?
Well, so the BBC announced that it's scrapping free TV licences for the over 75s, apart from for those who claim pension credit, and that's from June next year. And this is as a consequence of the deal struck between the BBC and the government back in 2015. Adam, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can't believe that the BBC has come out with this decision. You know, a week ago, I was in Portsmouth along with everyone else celebrating the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And then a week later, this very generation is told, by the BBC that you don't deserve, the one thing that we've given to you to recognise the contribution you've made, we're going to take away for 2/3 of you. And it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, talk about being out of touch. There's a moral vacuum here at the heart of the BBC when they're paying six-figure and higher salaries to presenters, etc., and senior executives, and yet they won't allow to some of the poorest people in our society, what is for many of them, the biggest source of comfort, isn't it? The only company that many of them have, and that's going to be taken away from them. And, I can't believe this treasured institution that was, the BBC, is transforming itself now into an agency for means testing and a public prosecutor. Auntie is going to put Granny and Grandad in prison. It is absolutely unacceptable, and the BBC should reverse the decision, but the Conservative government as well has a role to play here, because they promised in their manifesto that this free licence would be kept. And a promise made is a promise that should be kept, and certainly to this generation.
Yeah. Steve, I'm going to come to you in a bit. A woman there, your hand shot up as soon as this question was asked.
A lot of over 75s have actually got very large pensions. And I think that they've said that people who are on pension credit will still be entitled to a free licence.
Yes, they will.
So I think a lot of young people would probably think it's probably right to take it away.
The man there. In the sweater.
Any of the older people with the BBC licence who's supposed to be claiming pension credits don't actually claim pension credits because they belong to a generation of proud people who do not tend to get credits because they firstly don't know how to get credits, and they don't want to get credits because they want to live on their own means. I think people need to live in the real world with things. Yes, there are a number of people who are rich and could pay for it, but there are many people who cannot pay for it and will lose their only contact with the outside world with the BBC, and the BBC should be ashamed of itself.
Stephen, should all over 75s have the right to a free TV licence?
Yes, absolutely they should, and the government has handed the BBC this hot potato, having made a very clear manifesto commitment that over 75s would have the licence covered. They've then rescinded on that, and the BBC has had to pick up the pieces, and it has a budget that it has to manage. But I think there's a deeper question here, which is about what sort of society do we want to live in? And we are a deeply divided and polarised country right now. I think we're seeing young set against old, different people with different levels of education set against each other, cities versus towns. The country is more polarised than I've seen it at any time in my life, certainly. And the BBC plays a vital role in the cultural cohesion of our country. I think that it gives us, in this fragmented, atomised time, it gives you that one opportunity, that there's that one programme that people watch. And I know that consumption of TV has changed a lot, but there's still an iconic role for the BBC as what is quintessentially British and that holds us together as a country. And I think that this is a much bigger question. You can't put a price on that. You cannot put a price also on means testing people's social isolation and loneliness. So I think, there's an old saying, the definition of a Philistine is somebody that knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And that is the definition of this Tory government and their austerity policies and what they've been doing to this country for the last 9 years.
I should say that the BBC has said it is saying that free licences for all over 75s would mean the closure of BBC 2, BBC 4, the BBC News Channel, BBC Scotland Channel, Radio 5 Live and some local radio stations. That's what it would cost the BBC. Theresa?
I think the BBC should think again about this. I think we must find a way to continue the free licence for the over 75s.
And do you think the government bears any responsibility?
I think the government has a part to play here. I mean, the settlement with the BBC was based on the undertaking by the BBC that they would take this over, that they would continue it. But I do recognise there are financial implications for the BBC. I'm the biggest fan of the BBC, but they have got this thing wrong. I think there is an awkward contrast, but with the very significant amount of money they spend, not just on presenter salaries, but also, you know, there are 100 or so people behind the camera who are paid more than the Prime Minister. They spent, what, 100 million on their digital project, which they then abandoned. You know, there are ways in which the BBC can help fund this, but yes, I would certainly encourage the government to play a part in this as well and resolve this problem, because I think it's just not acceptable if this benefit for the over 75s is withdrawn.
Man at the back.
As with all other things in society, pensioners cover a whole range of society. Some of them are very wealthy, some of them, many in Wales here, are not very wealthy. Disabled people are very used to being means tested, and maybe this is somewhere where they should be means testing so that the wealthy pensioners don't get it and the ones who can't afford it do get it and maybe get more. It shouldn't have been passed to the BBC. The government should have been responsible for this, and they copped out of it and passed it on to the BBC and washed their hands of it, as politicians often do.
The man there in the glasses.
I suppose what's ironic is they won't pay their licence fee, they'll go to jail, they'll be given a free TV in their cell. Win-win.
Mark?
Well, in 2013, the BBC agreed with the government, in return for the licence fee going up by inflation, as it has, that they would fund free TV licence for the over 75s. So it's a breach of that commitment. So I think for that reason it should be reversed. I also think it's wrong that the BBC should be allowed to take criminal sanctions against people for not paying. At most, it should be enforced as a debt, as any other debt, rather than sending, admittedly, a small but nonetheless some people to prison. But more generally, I think, as particularly younger people look to other ways of taking in television, we have Netflix, we have Amazon Prime, we have lots of other competitors for the BBC, and younger people watch it far less. Also, many people don't feel the BBC represents them. Last week, we had 5 people on this panel, all 5 of whom had voted Remain. On Tuesday this week...
hang on. We had people who may have voted Remain taking the government position and also having changed their minds and supporting Brexit, even if they voted Remain originally.
Well, a lot of people who voted Remain are changing their minds to
support Brexit. Only one, actually, of the panel we had last week, I must just... Come on. Only one person actually was campaigning for Remain on the panel last week.
But all 5 of them voted Remain. Piers Morgan, who
they changed their minds. And let's not get into a whole conversation about last week. We had one person supporting Remain on the panel last week. But we're talking here about the TV licence.
And I think you have political party balance, but I think that often leads to an over-representation of people who voted Remain on the panel. I mean, this week
the question is, should all over 75s have the right to a free TV licence?
I think the BBC made a promise. It should stick to it. And I think the BBC, if it's as good as you say, should look to a model where people have the opportunity to subscribe rather than being forced to pay and imprisoned in some circumstances if they refuse.
Francesca?
I think it's really sad because these people paid into the system of their lives. And often TV is their only connection to the outside world because, as we know, many older people are very isolated. I wish we had a government who was proud to provide a bit of comfort to our older generation. But I think that the buck really has to stop with the Tories, really. This comes from their cuts. But I'm not really surprised because I don't feel that ordinary people really matter to the Tories much. I mean, this is a party who make nurses use food banks and who force firemen to take second jobs and who force 13,000 of our war veterans to live homeless. So I don't think they really care about ordinary people, and I think their actions are not one of a civilised society, which is why we really need a general election.
Okay. We're going to take another question from Michael Goff.
Following Welsh Labour's U-turn on the M4 Relief Road, is Wales closed for business?
Mark, shall I come to you first on this? So the M4 Relief Road, it was, there were plans to build this. It was then scrapped for environmental reasons.
I think it was largely scrapped because the First Minister in Wales, Mark Drakeford, said, having promised this in the Labour manifesto to deliver this M4 Relief Road, then 3 years later said, we looked at the accounts, the Cabinet's had a look at the capital programme, we've decided we can't afford this. He also did mention...
He did, so it had a substantial adverse impact on the wetland reserve.
Yeah, on the ground levels. He did mention that as well, but I think his primary reason was he said it was no longer a priority in terms of the finance. But they promised to do this in a manifesto. It was a very clear commitment that now 3 years later they have totally abandoned. And 2/3 of the Welsh economy, to a greater or lesser degree, uses the M4 to get to market. And particularly around Newport, which is in my region of South East Wales that I represent, the amount of those delays that the congestion causes around the Brynglas tunnels is absolutely extraordinary. And if you want to support the Welsh economy, if you want to encourage more jobs into Wales, if you want companies to set up here, you have to ensure that they have proper access to market. And if you've got all those cars sat in congestion, in a traffic jam, that is the worst possible thing for the environment. So I really think we need to get on to build this road, to open Wales up for business and to keep the promises that the Labour government in Wales made in their manifesto.
Michael, what's your view on this?
We have a haulage company, and if there's a hiccup at the Brynglas tunnels, we're sat there for hours. If there's a concert in Cardiff, nobody moves. It just comes to a grinding halt. On a Friday afternoon, you can't get through Wales. And, you know, the people that are making these decisions are mainly politicians who've never actually been in our world. They're career politicians. You need people that have been in our world, and you will know how serious it is. And as Adam said, promise made is a promise kept.
The woman at the back there. Yes, you.
I think it's ironic that Mark brought up funding when it comes to Wales, considering most of it does come from the EU, especially when you look at the valleys, the school I went to, funded by the EU, the college, everything. I just think it is a bit ironic.
Do you want to come back on that quickly?
I mean, I would. I'd say most of the funding comes from domestic taxpayers and particularly redistributed within the UK. I mean, Adam earlier spoke about independence, but every year in Wales we have a 13 billion fiscal deficit. Now, that's probably 30 or 40 times the amount that the EU was involved with.
Well, Wales was getting £680 million a year from the EU.
A quarter of our GDP every year is the difference between the tax taken in Wales and what is spent. In that situation, there is absolutely no way that you can make independence work if you are borrowing a quarter of everything you produce. And anything we got from the EU was a drop in the ocean compared to that. And the amount that we give in our net contribution from the UK on a per-head basis balances that out in any event.
Okay. Francesca. We're talking about the M4 Relief Road.
Yeah, I think, you know, we do have to take serious action on climate change and also invest in less polluting forms of transport. The science is very clear, guys. We have 10 years to avoid climate chaos. That means doing as much as we can to switch to a greener economy. So I congratulate Wales on taking climate change seriously. I think the Tory record on climate change is very worrying. I'm really frightened as a citizen of this country because the Tories hand out the biggest fossil fuel subsidies in the EU, and under Theresa May they've received 400k in donations. So I think that's very worrying, and that shows that their policies are largely dictated by corporate interests. And I just want to say, you know, as far as we know, we're the only life in the whole universe. We are so lucky to exist. And instead of protecting our beautiful planet and all the beautiful life forms on it, we're allowing politicians to willfully destroy our future in the name of short-term profit.
But Francesca, do you think the M4 relief road should have been built or shouldn't?
Well, I don't know about the details of the local traffic, but what I do know is it's obviously an issue for local people. But the biggest issue is how do we switch to an economy and a way of life that is not going to destroy all our futures.
Adam.
We were against the black route, but look, you know, it was in the Labour manifesto, and they reneged on that promise, and that's going to undermine people's trust, right? What they should have done is they shouldn't have wasted 100 million and taken 10 years to come to that decision, right? They should have looked, if they were never going to do it, they should have looked at the alternatives. We put the blue route, the alternative route on the table. We also agree, look, we need to invest.
You might have to familiarise those who aren't from the area, the blue route versus the black route.
There were two alternative routes. The blue route wasn't using basically our entire capital investment budget for the next, 5-6 years or decade would have been used just in one project. I agree with the speaker there. We've got transport problems in the whole of Wales, in every part of Wales, because we've got an infrastructure that isn't fit for purpose, right? We're the only country in Europe where you can't get from the south to the north or the north to the south by railway without going through the country next door. So we've got to invest in all of that. And yeah, I think we need a different vision. We've got a National Infrastructure Commission that's set up for Wales, which will have business people actually on the table, people like yourselves, sir, actually looking at the whole picture, not just road, but obviously the 21st century infrastructure, and the future has to be public transport.
Yeah, woman there in the striped top.
I agree totally with Francesca, because obviously I'm a young person, so I'm going to be most affected by all these environmental problems which are being caused. Do the panel not think that all the money that was spent into the various inquiries over the last goodness knows how many years, quite a bit pre my lifetime, quite honestly, it's been going on a while, do they think that maybe the money should have been better spent in more environmentally friendly alternatives that would have linked at Wales more easily for people to use, and then maybe leave the M4 just for, or with a higher priority for trade vehicles?
Stephen?
Politics is about choices, and one of the biggest dilemmas we have driven by climate change is how do you keep open for business? How do you keep your economy moving? How do you drive up productivity? But how do you also protect our precious planet for future generations? And we, I think, are constantly, as Assembly members, members of Parliament, anyone involved in politics thinking about this, constantly trying to weigh up how you get that balance right. And I think that's why you do need to commission reports, you need to commission analysis, but in the end, you sometimes have to take tough choices. And there are two promises here. Yes, there may be promises in a manifesto, but there is also the promise that we owe to future generations. And that is about protecting our planet. We are seeing the polar ice cap melting. We are seeing sea levels rising. We are seeing extreme weather events. We are seeing fires raging through the warmer parts of the world. Now, I absolutely understand people's frustration about the traffic on the M4, and it's a massive issue in my Aberavon constituency as well. But there is a bigger issue that we have to deal with here, which is about protecting the future of our precious planet. But by the way, the absolute cowardice of the British government of not investing in the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon and refusing refusing to electrify our railway line to Swansea. It's the Tory government in Westminster that's got some serious questions to answer when it comes to that point about protecting the future of our precious planet for future generations.
Stephen, how many miles of a railway did Labour electrify in Wales when they were in government in Westminster?
Well,
I think it was none, or possibly about 3 miles. This government has got the biggest investment programme in our railway network since the Victorian
Well, bring
era,
it to Swansea, please, Theresa. Can you bring it to
including
Swansea?
important improvements in relation to the railways in Wales. And I also want to sort of emphasise that cancelling the climate change is not an excuse to cancel this road project. The way to reduce emissions from transport is to shift to electric vehicles. That is the only way to do it. I think cancellation of this road after promising to do it, after it's been discussed for years, after millions of pounds have been spent on planning inquiries is deeply disappointing. This is a crucial route for Wales. I think that road could have been significantly advantageous in terms of the Welsh economy. And I can understand why people feel deeply let down about what's happened.
We've got just about time for one more question, which has been much talked about today. So I just want to come to it, if I may. Sophie Hulton.
Should comments made in the context of a comedy programme ever be seen as incitement to violence?
So you are, I assume, Sophie, talking about the comments made by Jo Brand. So Jo Brand was talking on a radio programme. She made a joke about the recent milkshake attacks on politicians. She said, why bother with a milkshake when you could get some battery acid? The BBC has now removed that joke from the catch-up service and says it regrets any offence that may have been caused. Francesca, I was going to ask you this as a comedian. What's your view on this?
I get asked to comment on offensive jokes a lot.
And what's your view on this particular one?
Well, I think it wasn't the wisest comment in this climate, and I wouldn't have said it. It was said on the comedy show, and she followed it up with, obviously, I wouldn't do this. So I think she clearly intended it to be a joke. I know people like Farage are saying it was an incitement to violence and the police should be called. But it's good to remember that in 2017, he said that if Theresa May didn't deliver Brexit, he would don a khaki, pick up a rifle and go to the front line. So I think that comment could be seen as an incitement to violence too. I also think a few weeks ago we had a story break out about the British Army using photos of Corbyn as target practice. I don't recall there being much media outrage on that.
It was widely reported, in
yeah,
fairness,
but I
Francesca.
don't recall Nigel Farage expressing particular concern over the safety of Corbyn. So I think often these issues are not treated on principle, but whether they're politically convenient or not.
Now, we've only got 5 minutes. I want you to be reasonably brief, if you would, Mark. Because, as Francesca said, Nigel Farage has talked about this today, has been very critical.
Yeah, and I think he's right to be. I mean, this sort of attacking people with milkshakes, I don't think is an issue, you know, in the way they say, of free speech. It's actually trying to shut down free speech. And from politicians on the right, there is a double standard here that left-wing comedians say this sort of thing.
But answering Francesca's point, do you see a double standard from
Fiona,
what Francesca was saying?
Is that particular programme, it was pre-recorded, and the BBC saw nothing wrong with it at the time, put in what sounded like canned laughter after it, and has taken, you know, over two days to actually do anything about it after the Prime Minister actually called them out on it. I think that was a wrong thing to say. The reason Nigel Farage has to go everywhere with security is because of what is said and because of what that encourages people to do. Now, I fought a by-election in Rochester in 2014 in which there was a significant degree of intimidation. My family, we felt they had to leave and go somewhere else outside Rochester for a couple of weeks because it got to such a level. And at that time, I didn't hear people from the other side calling that out. And I would like to condemn any sort of violence, any sort of threats in politics. We have to get rid of it. We have to have a common standard and one that applies to the left as well as the right.
Obviously, I recognise that, comedy, there's a need to be provocative, to outrage, but I think the atmosphere of intimidation that Mark's talked about is a reality. And, of course, we've seen that horrific example in the murder of the late Joe Cox. And therefore, I think the BBC were wrong to broadcast those comments. I really have to say that. It is, in these days, we really can't take those kind of chances. And it was very unwise of the BBC to broadcast those comments.
Now, I'm just going to quickly take a couple of points from the audience. The man back there in the glasses.
It seems amazing to me that there seems to be a complete lack of sense of humour and misunderstanding of what I heard that programme, and initially when Jo Brand made that comment, I was slightly shocked. And then, of course, I realised the whole context was how far can you push comments in a joking context? And she immediately made that very clear. The programme itself was called Heresies, for goodness sake. Where's the imagination and where's the understanding that that literal interpretation of what she said was made on the part of somebody who was trying to score a point very cynically?
The man in the check chair.
I think there's, some of the individual actions and of certain people is abhorrent, but I think based on the fact that in any other country, this current state that we're in terms of we've got a massively divided country in terms of the very close vote for Brexit. We've got our political parties also fragmented. In any other country, or a lot of countries around the world, we'd probably be in civil war now. And the fact that we can all stand here and actually have a discussion and a debate, I think is actually laudable of the country that we live in.
I think we've got about a minute left. I need to get Stephen in as well.
Yeah. I'm sure that, Jo Brand didn't intend this to be taken seriously, but I suppose the context is that we have, an increasingly violent political language, particularly women in politics, it seems, are suffering this kind of abuse. I've had a death threat, because of my position on Brexit, but, this is part of the backdrop at the moment, isn't it? So I think it's wise for us to be aware of that, and I think we need to kind of all of us need to come together and insist on a civility. We can have civilised disagreement, as you've said, as we've proven here tonight.
Stephen?
I think we are getting into a dangerous atmosphere where you've got a journalist asking Boris Johnson why he referred to women as letterboxes, and Tory MPs were booing her and not allowing her to speak.
We're talking about the joke that Jo Brand made. We've got only about 20 seconds left, so you're going to have to stay on the subject or we'll never finish the programme.
And you've got Nigel Farage going onto Parliament Square and calling it enemy territory. That sets a context in which comments that Jo Brand made are no longer acceptable because we've got into this nasty, polarised, conflict-based political debate. So we've got to draw the poison out of that. Everybody's responsible for doing that from all sides of the debate. And I really hope that we can get back to a politics and a debate, and particularly on social media, where you can disagree without being disagreeable.
Well, a number of you've got your hands up. I'm afraid we are out of time. Our hour is up. We will be in Tottenham, in North London, next week. And the following week, we will be in Halifax. Call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience, or you can go to the Question Time website. Here we are. Follow the instructions you can see on the screen. And if you want to continue the discussion, you want to have your say on tonight's topics, you can join Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, and that is on 5 Live right now. But for now, we've just got time to say thank you very much to my panel and for your candour earlier on. Thank you very much to the audience, and thanks to you at home for watching and listening from Brecon. Bye-bye.